Before the new film comes out, let's go over the brief history of the Fantastic Four. The company we now know as Marvel started out in 1939 with Marvel Comics. Seems like it would be obvious their name was Marvel, but it wasn't. It was Timely, then Atlas, then Marvel. At the time, they released their first ever superhero characters, which were Namor, the Angel, Mask Rider, I guess, and whatever, who cares about those guys, but most notably the Human Torch, who's on the cover of here. He is definitely like the Fantastic Four version of the character. He's a robot who happens to be called the Human Torch, but he's an android. I don't get it either. He had a sidekick. Yeah, that was one of the main characters of Marvel back in the day, next to Captain America, who was their big star. Marvel early on was known for its superhero stories, but they branched out to other stuff. And later they actually would ditch superheroes entirely during the late 40s and early 50s, well actually entirety of the 50s, due to the fact that a lot of their characters like Captain America were heavily based on World War II propaganda, meaning that they didn't really have much longevity outside of that. Captain America was known for punching Nazis and saving the day during war, but if the American war is all over, what are you going to do? Korean War? Communist stuff? Yeah, it didn't really work. The 1950s into what seemed like the early 60s seemed like a really bad time for comics, especially if you read Marvel Comics, since they weren't doing anything really new. They were tracing trends and chasing comic categories that they couldn't do. The superhero genre didn't seem to do that much good anymore, so they kept up with mystery, horror, romance, western, whatever else they can get their hands on. None of them really sold that well. They did okay, not that great, but nothing that really made them a mainstay. That's what most people at the industry thought, at least, including Stan Lee, who was a longtime worker at Marvel, who wanted to quit until he was given a proposition by his boss. At one of their rivals, DC, they were actually reviving their superhero genre. DC never stopped publishing superhero stories like Batman and Superman, but during the Silver Age, the late to mid-50s, they started reviving some characters like The Flash, and most notably in 1960, I believe, maybe it was 1959, who cares, Justice League of America, which was actually a new team, as their old one, Justice Society, was very different. Justice League featured all the mainstays of DC, and of course become a staple of comics, and of course it would sell very well. And of course Martin Goodman, the publisher of Marvel, was having conversations with DC about it, and he thought, hey, we need to do superheroes again. So he told his main writer, Stan Lee, who was also editor-in-chief, to work on a story like that. And, well, Stan Lee was hesitant because he didn't really want to do it, but then his wife said, well, might as well do it, and might as well write what you actually want to write, too, while you're at it, since if you're going to quit, you might as well go out with a bang. So Stan Lee agreed, and he brought this idea of a superhero team to none other than his best artist, the king of comics himself, Jack Kirby. The Fantastic Four was made by what's called as the Marvel method, that Stan Lee phrase. Basically, he comes with an idea, he has basically his artist write, and pretty much basically storyboard the whole entire thing. They do most of the work, and then he comes in later and adds in bubbles for dialogue. So that's pretty much the Marvel method, and that's pretty much how the Fantastic Four was created. Stan Lee came up with the idea, like, well, if we had a new team of superheroes that wasn't relying on the old one, we want to do something that's new and fresh, something that has been done before. How about we'll make them like real people, or the guy's already in a relationship with a girl, we don't have to worry about that drama. They don't even need to wear superhero costumes because they're just regular people. They're celebrities, and they have to worry about that, and all other sorts of things. They bicker a lot, they fight each other. Jack Kirby basically ironed out those concepts and created the four we see right here, being the Human Torch, Invisible Woman, the Thing, and Mr. Fantastic. The Human Torch, known as Johnny Storm, was the youngest member of the group, being kind of a teen, but not really. He was a hothead, which reflected in his powers. He's basically a reinvention of the Human Torch character from the Golden Age of Marvel. This character personality worked a lot better with his power set. As I said, I don't understand why an android would have fire powers of all things, and also be called the Human Torch when they are not. But I don't know, I never really read that Golden Age stuff, but I don't think most of you did either, so you can't come at me for that. But yeah, this is a pretty good reinvention with the character. Pretty much having the same base powers, being a guy who can turn himself on fire and fly, but he's also a teenage hothead who gets a lot of trouble with the rest of the family, which is what the Fantastic Four is, a family. Next up is the Invisible Woman, originally known as the Invisible Girl, which is, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. She's not a girl at all. She's the same age as Reed and Ben. In fact, she's older than Johnny, who are also siblings. Sue Storm originally wasn't that great of a character in the comics, I won't lie. That's because Stan Lee didn't know how to write women. In fact, she was lacking most of her powers, and in fact, she could turn invisible, and she was pretty useless. She used like a lasso at one point, but eventually the character would be rewritten to be a lot more competent as the mother figure, who's also not afraid to get in her few punches as well. She's very confident, and she's badass, and that's why we love the Invisible Woman. Mr. Fantastic is the leader of the group, Reed Richards. He's very smart, but he's also kind of dumb. This is a character trait, basically. He's one of those smart, dumb guys, basically. No common sense, but he's incredibly smart. He's oblivious to a lot of social cues. He's also the father figure of the Fantastic Four. And yeah, he's pulled everyone together quite literally with his elastic powers. He's always stretching himself, which is great for his power set. A lot of their character power sets are literally based off the personality, which is great. Why Fantastic Four was so great is because of that reason. Anyway, Yeah, his name is Mr. Fantastic. Stan Lee apparently identified the character a lot because he also said that he doesn't know how to shut up, which is apparently something he gave to the character of Reed Richards. Pretty funny. And the last main member, and probably the most fan favorite one, he's my favorite, is The Thing, which is, if Reed Richards is the most like Stan Lee, Ben Grimm is the most like Jack Kirby, as both of them are more silent, artsy types, I guess. He's not really artsy, but, that's what Jack Kirby apparently really resonated with the character of The Thing, and they would later make the character Jewish to reflect his background, if that makes any sense. Anyway, The Thing's a kind of a gruff, monster-looking rock creature thing, which is he's kind of off-putting, but at the same time, he's nice, he's a gentle soul who has kind of a rock on his shoulder, if you will, because people just perceive him a certain way, even though he's not really that way. He's a critical and well-run character that would even branch out to other stuff because he's pretty popular, and that's the main cast of Fantastic Four. The character's origin isn't that important or interesting, really. It's during the space age, so of course they go up into space and get hit by cosmic rays, which of course transforms them in the most fantastic way. For some reason, we had to have 2 films go way into detail about this very basic thing that's only mentioned in a brief flashback in the first issue, so even the first issue thinks it's just a way for them to get powers at the same time. So why does that become a main part of the 2005 Fantastic Four film, and especially the 2014 one? I do not know why they put so much effort into that, but whatever. In their first issue, they would fight their first recurring villain being the Mole Man, which you might not know if you're not a comic geek, but you probably remember his parody from The Incredibles. For the Underminer, that's what I know him, this guy mostly for. The Fantastic Four #1 was actually a pretty big hit and will eventually lead to more characters. It's known as the birth of the Marvel Universe. In fact, if you go back, pretty much every comic relates all the way back to this one. Even though some Golden Age comics are referenced in later issues, this is the one where pretty much everyone says this is where you start out with. So pretty much about Fantastic Four, we would have basically 0 Marvel characters, other than like Captain America and Namor, who aren't really that big names. But Fantastic Four would lead to creating the characters of Spider-Man, Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, X-Men, and so on and so forth. Pretty much every character that you like from Marvel owes their existence to the Fantastic Four issue #1. Readers pretty much instantly loved this team of characters and thought their world was kooky and fun as they added in new additions. They finally got costumes in issue 3 after fan complaints about them not wearing costumes the first 2 issues. They would get new vehicles like the Fantastic Car, new arch nemesis, as well as living in their own building known as the Baxter Building. One thing these Fantastic Four comics were known for at the time were introducing mainstays in the Marvel Universe that would expand to other issues, like in issue #2 when they introduced the shape-shifting aliens, the Skrulls, who would become mainstays in the Marvel Universe. While the characters fought a number of different villains and interesting characters, the most main nemesis they would have, and one of the most famous Marvel villains of all time, was Dr. Doom, who introduced himself in Fantastic Four issue #5. Dr. Doom has a history of Reed Richards being jealous of him, and he basically conquered his own land, and he built a time machine in his first issue, which is never mentioned in the movies, ever, but it literally appears in most of his appearances in the comics. This guy is pretty crazy. He is pretty intimidating due to the fact he has so much power, but he's also a pretty interesting character, because, well, what he believes, he really does believe in it, even if it is a little crazy. For that reason, he became a mainstay, also because his costume looks pretty cool, I won't lie. Another character they would fight a lot in the early days was Namor the Submariner. Mariner, I don't know how to say that. I've read the name for like a long time and I don't know. This was an obscure Aquaman-like character who actually predates Aquaman from the Golden Age of Marvel Comics. It would be the first character they would revive, unless you count the Human Torch, but that's technically a different character. And he would be an often on-again rival for the Fantastic Four that's very prominent in the Silver Age. Other characters that were introduced in the comics were in issue 45 was the Inhumans, which are not as popular as they once were, but are pretty well-known mainstays. Issue 52 showcased a character that become really popular, especially in recent times, the Black Panther, the first ever black superhero, would first appear in Fantastic Four #52. Another character they introduced was a character known as the Watcher, who would appear in multiple Fantastic Four stories as a guy who kind of watches over the Marvel Universe. He was a group of another bunch of Watchers. He would come down in issue 48 to tell the coming of Galactus in a very important Marvel storyline going up to the 50th issue of Fantastic Four. Lee and Kirby had created a lot of the Marvel Universe, but they wanted to have their Fantastic Four kind of a finale after as they were growing apart and wanted an epic way to conclude it in a way where they could still continue afterwards. In order to do that, they created a very epic final boss for pretty much the entire Marvel Universe known as Galactus, a giant purple guy who likes to eat planets. Pretty strange, but that's what Kirby came up with. He also came up with the fact that the character would have a herald known as the Silver Surfer, who was pretty much entirely created by Jack Kirby. Stan Lee really liked the character and gave him philosophical dialogue, which eventually people in the 60s really grew attached to. This era, known as This Be Doomsday, or the Galactus Coming of arc, is considered to be one of the best of Fantastic Four history, and will be adapted into 2 films. 1 pretty badly, and 2, well, we'll have to wait and see till the film comes out. The League and Ditko era of Fantastic Four, which lasted from issue 1 to 102, is considered to be one of the best comics of all time, runs of all time, which is a lot. This was a 6 Silver Age comic. Not every 6 Silver Age comic was great, but Fantastic Four is considered to be one of the best. In fact, still one of the most defining comic eras. And unfortunately, they would not seem to be able to keep the momentum as soon as Jack Kirby would leave after growing resentment to Stan Lee and getting all the credit for pretty much most of his work, let's be honest. Once Lee and Kirby were no longer in the book, the sales started to decline a bit. While the comic didn't really decline in quality, it was not as good as it was previously, though there are some fond storylines that fans have. Also, I forgot to mention that Sue and Reed had a kid known as Franklin, who has very strange powers. Very powerful, apparently. He also might be Kang, but I don't really know. The Fantastic Four were once Marvel's most popular comic, but they've been outshined by quite a few other characters, but their popularity didn't really die off. In the 1980s, they had a pretty well-known and loved run by John Byrne from 1981 to 1986, which emphasized character growth and streamlined the stories. And there are also some minor lineup changes that would come here and there, like She-Hulk being the most notable member that would come in and out of the team. But for the most part, it's usually just the main 4, as it is heavily relied on those 4 characters, at least Fantastic Four. Not Avengers or Justice League or X-Men. They can have interchangeable characters. Fantastic Four doesn't really change their team, but they do have other members. For example, they've had characters like Crystal, as well as Spider-Man, sometimes in their ranks, but not for often. The only notable one, like I said, is She-Hulk. The comic did slip a little bit during the 1990s and 2000s. It was rebooted multiple times, but nothing really stuck, as Fantastic Four was never really a dark and gritty comic. It was more of a fun space adventure comic. So yeah, they have changes to try to make it work in those time periods. Didn't really work. There are some good eras. The worst thing being Sue Storm's costume change during the 90s, which is awful. That's all I can say. Flat out awful. But it wasn't all bad for Fantastic Four, as they've had multiple adaptations into media, especially cartoons, starting in 1967 with their own cartoon by Hanna-Barbera, which was, well, I don't think anyone really cares about this cartoon. Unlike the others, this one doesn't have any, cult following, especially compared to the Spider-Man one. The second cartoon from the 70s is actually more notable, because for some reason, this one is lacking entirely of the Human Torch because of some weird rights at the time from another show. So instead, they replaced him with Herbie the Robot, who will become a mainstay in the comics, but it's such a bizarre thing to have just a random robot part of the main team who doesn't even, he's not even really a main member, he's kind of just an assistant. What were they thinking? One of their more notable shows was the 90s cartoon, which was just okay. It was loosely attached to the Spider-Man animated series and X-Men animated series, but nowhere near as popular as either of those two. And it was just a way to keep the characters in the limelight, but not in a way that really gave much to them, at least compared to other Marvel characters. In 1994, there was an infamously never-released film called Fantastic Four that's been leaked out by Roger Corman. This film has actually been noted to be not that bad, actually, especially compared to some of the other theatrical release films. It's very low budget, but it has a cult following. People were saying release a better version of it, because there's no reason for them not to. The main reason why this film even exists is because of some weird budget and film rights that some company was going on, wanting to make a film, but not at the same time. It's very confusing, and I don't got much time to go into it. It's brief history, after all. The Fantastic Four finally hit theaters in 2005 with Fox at the helm. The film released with mixed reception. While it did financially well, a lot of people weren't too happy, as the characters seemed, well, they were there, they weren't exactly how they were in the comics, and a lot of the charm was pretty much gone, replaced with pretty much goofy cheesiness, which didn't really reflect that well into the actual film, being a kind of a weak story and narrative. Its sequel didn't improve much, pretty much being most the same as the last one, which is disappointing fans, as they promised Galactus in the Silver Surfer. While Silver Surfer was done okay, the Galactus reveal was so bad that it became infamous, and the franchise ended right here. Not really improving on the first film and terribly adapting a very fan-favorite storyline, so it really made the Rise of the Silver Surfer movie so hated, especially the Cloud Galactus. I don't need to say anything more, it's literally just a cloud. Where is his body? Where is it? They were too embarrassed to showcase it, and that really showcases that they really weren't prepared to make a Fantastic Four film if they couldn't even show the character.
Gotta say, it's fantastic.
Say that again?
It's fantastic.
Just kidding, it's not fantastic, it's garbage. Meanwhile, the 2015 reboot, also by Fox, is considered to be one of the worst superhero movies of all time. It's not hard to see why. with a tons of problems with the director, strange casting, and oddly very very bad script for a Fantastic Four film that was mangled to try to be a generic superhero film. It ended up being a giant disaster and ended up being a clusterfuck of a film that's only worth watching for the laughs because it's fucking terrible. Literally nothing about this film represents Fantastic Four in any way, or even a good superhero movie, or even just a good movie, or even a good horror body throw movie. Everything about it is terrible. God awful. It's a shame there's really good actors in the movie, but they do a bad job because the script is so bad. To make matters worse, the only reason this film was even made in the first place was so that Disney could get their hands off the rights to Fantastic Four to put them in the MCU, which ended up being pointless because Disney would just buy out Fox just to get their rights of the Fantastic Four and X-Men, and just because they're tired of going around the middle. While this was all going on, Fantastic Four remained in comics, and they pretty much been consistently good. There hasn't really been a notable, really bad issue of Fantastic Four. They're just one of those comic series that just keeps going on. People like them. They do new things, and people like it. It is one of those things where they can do really well in the comics. You just can't do well in the physical media. It's very strange. The only other notable appearance of them was a cartoon in the 2000s called World's Greatest Heroes, which it has some following, but nothing that's really that substantial compared to other superhero cartoons and Marvel characters in general. During the 2020s, Disney, of course, bought Fox, including that would be the Fantastic Four rights, so of course they would implement their first appearance in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness as a fan casting would become made in the film. This one became joked on because of how useless he was in the film. Sorry, Jim from The Office, but it's an okay casting, actually, but that whole scene with all the cameos was pretty much pointless. That film really needed a couple of rewrites. Come on, guys. And finally, in 2025, we are finally getting an MCU Fantastic Four film, which actually doesn't even really take place in the MCU. It takes place in its own universe, where Fantastic Four exists back in the 1960s, which is something that people have thought would be a good idea for a while, basing it directly on those 60s comics, but making it literally take place in the 60s. It's not a bad idea, and apparently will continue on in the MCU somehow. We don't know until the film comes out, not too long from now. A lot of people are excited about this film, mostly because it looks like they're actually going to be taking into what makes the characters great from the comics in the movie, focusing on their family dynamic, not worrying so much about their pointless origin, which isn't that interesting to begin with. Like I said, they go to space, they get cosmic rays, that's it. Why they focus so much on them. And also the fact that Galactus is actually going to be shown in his full form. We'll see if Disney can pull off making a good Fantastic Four film, again, as they already did. As the 2004 Pixar film The Incredibles by Disney has a lot of similarities to Fantastic Four, from the family dynamic of a superhero team to a lot of the Silver Age stuff from that era. So if they can do it there, then why not again? Well, they weren't able to do that well with Incredibles 2, but Incredibles 1 is one of the best films of all time. It's really pretty heavily based on Fantastic Four. Maybe not directly, but it's very similar. So will Marvel do these characters justice? Is this finally the time we get a good Fantastic Four film that isn't a bootleg, canceled film from the 1990s? We will have to wait and see. Thank you for watching. This was a brief history, so I didn't go over every detail. There's a lot of comic runs I didn't go over. Though mostly the most important ones are the 1960s ones, which I kind of glanced over. But there actually isn't as much history to them as I thought when it comes to the media and everything like that. But yeah, there we go. There's a brief history. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye. See you later.